Welcome back to Power and Politics. Back to our exclusive story now about Iran's downing of Flight 752. CBC News has learned the government is in possession of an audio recording. CBC listened to it, and in it, a man who sources identify as Iran's foreign affairs minister discusses the possibility the plane was shut down intentionally. All 176 people on board that plane were killed, including 138 people with ties to Canada. Payam Akhavan is a former UN prosecutor and current member of the Permanent Court of Arbitration at The Hague. He's also a professor of international law at the University of Toronto. Hi, Professor Akhavan. Good to see you. Thank you for making the time.
My pleasure. Good to see you, Vashi.
How significant is this recording from your perspective?
I would say it's highly significant. It's Iran's own foreign minister saying that it is not unlikely that the destruction of PS752 was intentional. And this, of course, is in contradiction with the official narrative of human error, which he has been offering on behalf of Iran on the world stage. So I would say the fact that he, although he doesn't suggest that he is a direct witness of fact, but the fact that someone so well informed about the inner workings of the Islamic Republic of Iran believes that there is a considerable likelihood that this was intentional, I believe is highly significant.
He also, what really stood out to me in Ashley's reporting is that part of the conversation also included a discussion around the likelihood of, if that is the conclusion that is reached, that ever becoming public, like the government ever admitting publicly that is the conclusion that they reached. What do you make of that?
Well, he goes beyond that. He says not simply that the government wouldn't admit it, but that nobody would really know.
Right.
Not even he would know. So he confirms the obviously secretive nature of the Iranian government. In this particular case, the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, who are responsible for launching the surface-to-air missile. So he's basically telling us that we will never get to the bottom of what really happened. And Mr. Goodale, in his report, the special advisor of the prime minister, has already said that Iran cannot be trusted to investigate itself. And it seems that Iran's foreign minister would also agree with Mr. Goodale's conclusions.
So where does that leave the search for accountability? Because at the same time, Mr. Goodale and the previous foreign affairs minister who led this file in this country, he's now being replaced by Mark Arnault. But they talked about justice and seeking accountability as the real priorities in their pursuit. If you can't trust the regime investigating things, and they've now admitted on this recording that even they might not know what happened, and even if they did, it might not become public, where does that leave the search for accountability?
Well, on the one hand, I think Iran needs to be pressured to conduct a proper investigation, to offer further details of what in fact happened. But ultimately, we need to look at international mechanisms for accountability because it's very doubtful that the Iranian government itself would conduct a proper investigation.
Okay, let me separate those two things and first ask you about the idea of applying more pressure. How do you see that unfolding, and from where should the pressure come?
Well, I think Iran has now had a year to complete its technical investigation. And now it's time to impose some measure of accountability. If in fact that investigation is not credible, the matter could be raised before the International Civil Aviation Organization in Montreal, the relevant UN agency in this particular case. The matter could potentially be raised even before the International Court of Justice in The Hague. Mr. Goodale's report did raise both of those possibilities. And I think that airlines throughout the world have to ask whether it's safe to fly over Iran, given the circumstances. So I think that it's very important now to move to the next stage of telling Iran, well, you've had a year to conduct your investigation, and now it's time to hold those responsible for this tragedy accountable.
And just on your mention of the timing, how important is that to kind of get on with it now? It has been, you are able to say it's been a year. There is no accountability, although Iran is offering compensation. There's no conclusion in any of the investigations that have been launched. How important is it to do something like you're describing now rather than wait more?
Well, I do recognize that initiating these legal procedures is not a simple matter. It has to be thought about very carefully, and there are certain procedures which have to be followed. But I would say in the coming months, it is time to move in that direction. We have to remember that when the United States shot down Iran Air Flight 655 over the Persian Gulf in 1988, this is exactly what Iran itself did. It brought the case before the International Civil Aviation Organization, before the International Court of Justice, which ultimately led to a settlement with the United States. And there's no reason why Canada, Ukraine, and the other concerned states shouldn't be doing the same thing. And the families of the victims have told us that they're not interested in compensation. They're seeking truth, they're seeking justice, and that is what we need to give them.
As far as the International Court of Justice is concerned, what might that process look like, and do you expect it to take a lot of time?
Well, yes, these procedures are time-consuming. And there's a 1971 Montreal Convention on the suppression of acts against the safety of civil aviation. And it includes circumstances where there is possibility of intentional destruction of aircraft. And the point is, we don't know the truth. There has to be a credible investigation. And in fact, the obligation under international law is to conduct a proper investigation. And now we have a recording of the foreign minister of Iran saying that it is not unreasonable to conclude, or at least to discount the possibility that this was not human error and that it was in fact an intentional attack against civilian aircraft. And this is an issue of utmost importance, not just to Canada, who had many of its citizens killed, or the Ukraine, whose aircraft was destroyed. It's an issue of importance to the entire international community, which has an interest in safeguarding the security of civil aviation.
And also, I think you mentioned Canadians, but for me, always grounded in the people, the 138 people with ties to Canada and their families whom we've interviewed, and I know you've spoken, I believe, to some of them, who have lost just everything and have zero answers 1 year later.
Well, it's heartbreaking to speak to some of the families of the victims who have lost everything, and the only thing that they hold on to is the hope for some measure of truth, some measure of justice. And it's very important, not just that we stand in solidarity with them in their grief and sorrow, but that we also show a little bit of teeth and say that, Canada takes very seriously such an attack on civilian airliner, killing many of its citizens, and that we will not sweep this under the carpet, and that we will demand justice. And as I said, I think the government in many respects has been exemplary in the appointment of Mr. Goodale. His report has been outstanding, and it gives us really the roadmap for the way ahead. And now it's the time to take that report, its recommendations, the far-reaching questions which Mr. Goodale has asked, and move to the next step, which is to demand accountability. And the recording of the foreign minister now making this admission, I think, should only make us more convinced and more determined that we must demand some measure of accountability.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. Thank you very much, Professor Akhavan. Great to have you with us again.
Thank you, Vashi.
Payam Akhavan is a former UN prosecutor, currently a member of the Permanent Court of Arbitration at The Hague. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.